With the unalterable force of Greek tragedy, big business moves from misunderstanding to quarrel, to spat, to fight, to battle, to campaign, to war, to Armageddon. Its comedy is wild, yet so deep is its understanding of man's foolish ferocity, and so firm its contact with logic and reality, that it leaves the spectator with the uneasy feeling that not only could all this happen, it could happen to him.
Hello, you're listening to the Laurel and Hardy podcast, and this is episode 31. I'm your host, Patrick Vasey, the author of the forthcoming book, Laurel and Hardy Silence, and on today's show, we complete our deep dive into Stan and Babe's 1929 masterpiece, Big Business. On the previous show, episode 30, Randy Skretvedt and I discussed the film and also covered the mythology surrounding a couple of famous or infamous legends connected to the production. Primarily, Hal Roach's much-related tale that the wrong house was destroyed in error. Now, Randy sided with Stan Laurel and thought that Hal story was a load of baloney. So on today's show, I'm delighted to welcome back film historian and expert on the Hal Roach Studios, Richard W. Bann. And Richard will cover all of this and more as we attempt to put this argument to bed once and for all. But before we do, I have a couple of things to pass on. Firstly, I've been trying for a while to get these podcast episodes in sync with the number of the films they cover. So for instance, this episode is episode 31, and we're now looking at film number 31, the 31st film Stan and Babe made together. So from now on, each regular episode will have the same number as the number film made by the boys. Not that it matters, it's just something that I've been trying to do for a while. Secondly, a big thank you to Thubs for the 5-star rating and for leaving the following review. And Thubs says, "Superb podcast, 5 stars. If you think you know Laurel and Hardy, think again. This sublime podcast features expert analysis, behind-the-scenes info, and much, much more. Patrick delivers a fantastic podcast week after week. If you're remotely interested in the boys, then this is definitely worth a listen." So thank you so much, Thubs. Now, on the last episode, Randy dropped many hints during our discussions about some restored versions of the Laurel and Hardy silent films that would be becoming available soon. Now, unfortunately, Randy couldn't reveal much more than that at the time, but since the episode came out, we have had confirmation of an exciting new Blu-ray release scheduled for release in July, which will feature all of the boys' silent films together from 1921 through to 1927, all beautifully restored and looking incredible. And I've had a sneak preview of the quality of one of these films, and let's just say my jaw is still on the floor. The set is produced by Serge Bromberg and is being released through Flickr Alley, and my copy is already on pre-order. I will be producing a special bonus episode of this podcast next month, where I'll be chatting with Serge Bromberg and getting the lowdown on this very exciting project. Can't wait for that. Serge will also be contributing an article about the set in this summer's issue of the Laurel and Hardy magazine too, so look out for that. Speaking of the magazine, the summer issue is now on its way to completion. Randy Skretvedt is contributing an exclusive essay on his favourite of the boys' shorts, Helpmates. So make sure you don't miss that by subscribing to the magazine over at laurelandhardyfilms.com. And finally, as I mentioned last time, I have, in the past couple of weeks, launched the Laurel and Hardy podcast's Patreon page. If you're not aware, Patreon is a place where you are able to practically support your favourite creative projects, such as podcasts, and keep them going. And in return, you will receive exclusive benefits, and only for a small few dollars, euros, or pounds, of course. So I've set up 2 tiers of support for this podcast. The basic level gives you access to all of the exclusive podcast episodes that I post on there. They're not available anywhere else. And the second tier also gives you access to that, plus also a number of other benefits, like a gift subscription to the Laurel and Hardy magazine, and invitations to participate in future Q&A sessions with our guest experts, to name but 2. So a huge thank you to those of you who have already signed up and become patrons of the podcast. That's Anthony Arthur, Daniel Malise, Michael, I don't have your surname, unfortunately, Michael, Daniel Hurd, Michael Fitzpatrick, Karen Owen, Alistair Gray, and Frank Labrador. Thank you so much, guys.
1,000 thanks.
And as patrons, they are now able to access the exclusive video episode, which I've posted recently, in which I interview actor Jeffrey Wiseman, all about his love for Laurel and Hardy and his experience playing Stan Laurel at Universal Studios and all around the world at various events. There's also a bonus audio segment available right now with Steve Massa, where I ask him which films he would banish to Bogeyland. And the latest post, which I've just put up, is 30 extra minutes with Randy Skretvedt, which didn't make the final edit of episode 30. And there are some fascinating tangents to explore on there. Now, producing a quality podcast is no easy feat, and especially when I work full-time, I have a young family, I'm writing 3 books, I'm the editor of the magazine as well, so I have to say your support as a patron of this show goes a long, long way in ensuring that I'm able to keep the wheels turning and keep this podcast going too. So if you'd like to or are able to show your support, please do visit patreon.com, that's patreon.com, and search Laurel and Hardy Podcast. Right, on with today's show. To complete our look at big business and to provide the other half of the argument about whether the wrong house was destroyed during the production of the film, today's guest is Richard W. Bann. I'm thrilled to say that here with me today for this part of our deep dive into what is arguably Laurel and Hardy's finest silent comedy, Big Business, is the world's leading expert in the Hal Roach Studios. It's returning guest, film historian extraordinaire, and friend of the podcast. It's Richard W. Bann. So welcome back to the podcast, Richard.
Hi, Patrick. I'm happy to be here. Always happy to talk about Laurel and Hardy and Hal Roach Studios. I've got some tea. I celebrated St. Patrick's Day. I listened to the chorus. I'm all ready to go.
You had to plug the cause. I love it. Okay, fantastic. So we've spoken in the past, Richard, about possible films that you would like to speak about on the show, and straight away you said Big Business. So what is equally special about that for me is that it was over this particular film. I think I've mentioned this to you once before, and I knew you didn't remember it, but I certainly did. This was the film that we actually had our very first correspondence over. In 2018, and it was a little heated at the time because I wrote my first essay, my first blog on Big Business, and I'd written about certain facts in inverted commas that I thought were right associated with this film, and you'll know what I'm talking about, I'm sure. And you were very quick to correct me in no uncertain terms, which was great. And we had quite a heated debate about it at the time. And yeah, I was fuming. I could tell you were fuming, but we very quickly got to the right place. And you passed me on some information that I wasn't aware of. And we ended friends, and that was nice. And from there on in, it's just got better and better. So this has come full circle with me now with our relationship. So
No more arguments from now on.
No more arguments.
That's right.
Isn't it silly?
Yeah, sure.
I didn't remember that, but you refreshed my recollection. And the reason I didn't remember it is that I've had this exchange with so many friends and fans over the years. It all blurs together, and that's one thing I do want to talk about.
yes, well, we will get on to all of that. So I know you have a lot that you want to impart your wisdom, which is great, and I can't wait to hear what you've got to say about Big Business, because it is a fabulous short, wonderful reputation. So what can you tell us about Big Business, Richard? What
I'd like to do is touch on some few considerations or tidbits. I know you're talking to Randy about this as well, and I'm guessing that these are things that he is not addressing in his treatise. I'm sure he'll do the important stuff. So just supplemental stuff here. That's how I regard what I want to cover. And I made a list of 6 things to go over. Otherwise, we can talk about a great short subject like this forever, right?
Yeah.
Bill Everton called it the funniest 2 reels on film, though in the Blu-ray audio commentary for Battle of the Century, I made the case for that being the apotheosis of all comedy short subjects, And when I was done, I felt like a prosecuting attorney, including his final argument before the court. And I think I would have won that case. But in fact, I will concede that the Big Business is better and funnier. And won't you agree that it is?
Yes, I think I would agree with that, yeah. And it's complete. We can see it all, which Battle, we can't see it all yet.
Right. And here is one unimpeachable endorsement I'd like to share. And no less than George Stevens. And he's a big favorite director of mine. And I will say, for those who don't know George Stevens' work, of course, he worked at Hal Roach Studios for a decade. He was the cinematographer on most of their silent shorts. He directed the best Tracy Hepburn Woman of the Year, the best musical ever made with Astaire Rogers, Swing Time, the best adventure film ever made, Gunga Din, and the second best Western ever made, Shane. And he said about Big Business, quote, "It was one of the 10 great comedy films of history," end quote. And he said also that both Two Tars and Big Business contain more laughs per foot than anything Chaplin ever did.
Isn't that a pip?
It certainly is.
That's a pretty high endorsement from someone that you have to really respect. So anyway, the first item of the 6 I'd like to go over is the Stan Laurel letter. It's not mentioned in Randy's fine book, nor does it appear in the Good Letters from Stan website. And
okay.
We both highly endorse both of those, both Randy's book and that website.
Yes, absolutely.
And this letter is addressed to Gene Davidson in Ohio on April 25th, 1963, in which he says, and incidentally, I quote this excerpt in the Big Men of War essay you will be publishing.
Oh, great, okay.
In which he says, yes, that is correct about Jimmy Finlayson knocking himself out in the film Big Business. It was not left in the finished picture, as when that happened, the camera and everybody stopped to help Jimmy. It was so unexpected, took everyone by surprise, including poor Jimmy himself. He was more surprised than anybody. That was a standing laugh amongst us for many years after. It was so funny, end quote.
It was so funny.
The letter to Stan, which prompted that reply, was following up on the reference made by Jack McCabe and Mr. Laurel and Hardy to the scene where the two salesmen are talking to Finlayson in his doorway, and he says to the crew before they turn the camera, quote, let me go, boys, stand back, men. And then he tries to do this magnificent fadeaway double take, but he snapped his head back and hit the brick portal of the doorway. Oof. And he was knocked out cold. So I think we all need to watch what both leads up to and comes after that scene in order to see what, if anything, we can glean about his condition there, because he'd been knocked out.
What are you trying to do? Make me out a bigger fool than I look? I am?
So, okay, so that's number one. Number two, we don't see the first potential customer for Christmas trees, just the hammer that he or she swings from inside, indicating disinterest. But the second one is Lyle Tail, who also has no interest. Ollie suggests her husband might want one. No, she smiles, being coy. She has no husband. Stan interjects with his own Big Business sales pitch. I think he says, if you had a husband, would he buy one? so that's Lyle Tail. Now, incredibly, more than half a century ago, long time ago, dear God, when I first identified all these people not named Finlayson Hall or Mae Bush or Thelma Todd who appeared in these Hal Roach comedies, and by the way, back then, nobody cared, which I find to be an irony. And I've talked about this with Dave Lord Heath for his great website. Nobody cared one whit when I'd excitedly share the news, expecting people would find this at least worthwhile, that I'd identified marginal actors like Sam Lufkin and Jack Hill. Nobody knew who they were. And nobody anywhere knew or shared any interest as to even what their names were. but I worked so hard on this. And one by one, working from scratch, I got them all except for Estelle Terre and Hayes Robertson, if you know who they are. And those discoveries came way after the 1960s and early 1970s. Now, back then, this really was the dark ages. We didn't have the research tools available today. No internet, no IMDb, no DVDs, no Lantern. There were only a couple of books, and some of them weren't so good, and some 16 millimeter prints. You could go to Lincoln Center in New York or the Academy Library in LA, or you could call people on the phone, which is something that I did a lot of. But as I say, it seems like the dark ages by comparison. And P.S., I can add one more name to the big business cast list that I never knew until recently. There's a balding old man you see as part of the neighborhood crowd. He didn't work that much, always in small parts, such as The Idle Class and The Circus with Chaplin. I've got a list here. The Boys Will Be Joys with Our Gang, Spite Marriage with Keaton, Movie Crazy with Harold Lloyd, Good Scout Buster, which I just screened for the Buster Brown series. The guy's name is Hugh Saxon. So I need to share that with Lord Heath for his sterling website. By the way, have you seen that website?
Oh, I have. Yes, many times.
Amazing. So all kudos to Dave Lord.
Fabulous.
So anyway, so everyone takes all this for granted. Everyone knows all these people almost like friends or relatives. I mean, aren't they?
Yeah.
But again, back then, no one knew their names and no one cared either. I always found that curious.
How did you find them, Richard? Is this from sort of interviewing alumni and showing them photographs and asking them, or how did you actually identify these obscure people?
I use sources like period casting directories, studio documents when I could get them. Right. Because I was already connected to Hal Roach Studios going way back. So call sheets were really helpful if I could find them. Right. But the most important thing was talking to, and you can't do this now, Hal Roach Studios alumni who shared what they could remember. And a lot of the time, their memories weren't so good. And Patrick, that happens when you get older, which I am finding out about. But it was one of them who told me who Lyle Teo was, and I can't remember. So again, here is my poor memory. I can't remember who ID'd her for me. It was maybe Joe Cobb, Gordon Douglas, Lou Foster, Bob Davis. They were pretty good. Yeah. Whoever it was, he pronounced her name. He said the name, Lyle Teo, like the ubiquitous character actor Lyle Talbot, spelled and sounding the same, L-Y-L-E, Lyle, not Lily. Why should a name spelled the same like that be pronounced differently as a function of gender? Plus, it never occurred to me that someone who worked with her would mispronounce her name. Yes. and using her name in conversation with Hal Roach Studios alumni, no one ever corrected me and said, oh no, it's Lily, not Lyle. But for some reason, however, in recent times, people have been saying that her name is Lily based on what, I wonder? That Lyle is just a man's name? I have no idea how that got started, but it's wrong. And there's an entertaining Todd Pitts short called Red Noses, 1932. And you hear Blanche Payson pronounce her name. And again, it's Lyle, not Lily, Lyle. There's the proof. Lyle rhymes with smile. I could have identified Lyle Teo in the 1960s or 70s had I been able to see the first Hal Roach film that both Laurel and Hardy worked on together, which was, you want to guess? Yes,
Nanette. Of course it is. Stupid boy. Yes, of course it is.
And Laurel was the co-director and Hardy was the actor. Now, Lyle Teo receives her only screen billing that I know of in this short by way of a text title. In fact, she has the film's title role as Nanette. And in Randy's book, I didn't know this. I never researched it, but in Randy's book, it says that she died at age 82 in 1971. And sadly, no one got to her for an interview or to express to her how much people like her added to the approximately 50 movies that she made at Hal Roach Studios. So then, number 3. See, we're moving right along here. So there's a supposed controversy around the question, Are they selling Christmas trees in July or Christmas time? Now, what do you think? And I'll tell you what I think.
Well, I used to think they were selling it in summertime in July, and I don't know where that's come from, but I know now that it's actually at Christmas time. It was shot in Christmas week, wasn't it?
And we shouldn't care really. Either way, it's funny.
Yeah.
The text title says only selling Christmas trees in California, and as you've just said, they actually filmed in December 1928, right at Christmas time. However, both Stan Laurel and Bill Everson, two pretty solid sources, have said the summer or July. But if I had to pick a side and prosecute the case for it, I'd say the setting is Christmas time because the boys are wearing gloves.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Winter coats. And I live here, and I guarantee no one in LA is wearing any kind of a coat in July.
That's right.
And at one point they asked, can we take your order for next year? If it were July, you'd be soliciting orders on a return trip in December, not quote next year.
Of course,
you wouldn't ask a question like that in July.
No.
So that's dispositive of the question in my opinion. And one more thing. And at the end, when Stan hands a cigar to Finlayson, he says to him, "Merry Christmas." So I'd say that people who think it's July have never been to Southern California in December when it looks like July.
Right.
So then number 4.
So far, so good.
It wasn't so far.
It wasn't so far.
I want to say something about the physical film elements.
Okay.
We should be so lucky with respect to Hats Off as we've been with Big Business. It's their best silent film, and we have had the most and best 35 millimeter preprint for it, which has all been just pristine. Now, Randy probably has or will tell you he bought a beautiful 35 millimeter print of Big Business on eBay, and he doesn't even collect film. Well, except back in the day, he bought 8 millimeter Laurel and Hardy films. I know that.
Yeah.
But so we get so lucky with respect to Big Business that a 35 millimeter print turns up on eBay of all places. Now, we did our film restoration and preservation on this title for Munich in 1994, and we worked from one of the 2 camera negatives, which by that time had, and I didn't remember that, but I pulled out my QC report on this when we did this work. It had 4 short, higher generation replacement sections that were spotted throughout. And we commissioned a great Wurlitzer organ score by Gaylord Carter for it too. And as I said, I dug out my QC report on this, and I wrote at the time that this may be the best looking 35 millimeter fine grain master that we had seen so far anywhere in the Hal Roach library.
Wow.
Now, I'm not sure if we had I just don't remember, if we had the domestic or the export camera neg, and you know there are differences in the positions of the camera and how long the takes last, etc. But one of them wound up at the UCLA Film and Television Archive. And I remember the day in 2008 when my friend Jerry Goulden over there had to terminate the life of one of them. One of these 2 camera negatives, because it was so far gone to nitrate deterioration. It could have been the one that we had used in 1994. I just don't know.
Right,
but now
okay.
think of this. 1 minute, you're holding that precious relic in your hand, something that was right there, only a few feet away from Laurel and Hardy and Finlayson as they performed their work during the Christmas season of 1928. That's how old this was. Something that had been loaded into the camera by either George Stevens or Jack Roach, which this relic had survived about 8 decades. And the next minute, you submerge it in water. We're holding services for it, and the original camera negative is gone. It's gone, and it's as bad as somebody dying, you know? And I remember Jerry told me about this and how bad he felt that he had to do this.
Yeah.
And there are 2 characters. Their failed stewardship that we have to blame for this. And Russell Babbage has met one of them, maybe both of them, but as Mr. Hardy says in Their First Mistake, well, we won't go into that.
Yeah.
We won't go into that.
No.
Better left unsaid. So number 5. My mother told me one time, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. So I'm not going to say anything. So number 5, the big business house location.
Yeah.
Well, first, have you and I ever discussed where I have lunch every Tuesday and why? Have we discussed that?
I think you might have mentioned it once or twice.
Okay.
Is it the Culver Hotel we're talking about?
You are correct, sir. Now, do you, next question. Do you know who Chuck McCann was?
Yes.
For those who don't, Chuck McCann, there are no prizes for correct answers, Patrick, but you're doing very well so far. Chuck McCann was an actor who started out as a kid show host running Laurel and Hardy movies on early TV over New York television. Before he got into movies himself, Chuck did some famous TV commercials. They probably didn't play in the UK, but they're very big here. Everybody saw these commercials. And he was also a voice actor. Now, ironically, this voice actor just missed an Oscar nomination for playing a mute in a film called The Heart is a Lonely Hunter in 1968. Chuck was always calling Stan Laurel on the phone in the 1950s and 1960s.
Wow.
And visiting him when Chuck was working on movies or television in LA. And Stan Laurel put Chuck McCann together with Jim McGeorge. He was the one who put them together. And the two formed a long-standing Laurel and Hardy partnership doing impressions of our heroes for commercials, TV shows, personal appearances. Well, Chuck lived in Queens Village, New York. And he lived 4 doors away from Al Kilgore, who was also regularly phoning Stan. Now, this was around 1960, but Chuck and Al did not know each other. Now, this is such an odd coincidence. When at last they met and learned what they had in common, they teamed up with Jack McCabe, and they then, with 2 or 3 others, formed the Sons of the Desert to propagate the spirit and genius of Laurel and Hardy, and the rest is history.
Right.
And the magnificent caricatures that Al Kilgore drew of Laurel and Hardy, which you see on Jack McCabe's original Laurel and Hardy biography, were actually created for Chuck McCann's WPIX TV show called Laurel and Hardy and Chuck. So fast forward to about the year 2000, when Chuck and I had both, long before, moved from New York to Los Angeles. Now, we were seeing each other 5 nights a week at the Playboy Mansion when I learned about gentrification going on in Culver City, which had become run down. The city landmark, which you just mentioned, the Culver Hotel, where they shot so many silent Hal Roach comedies, had fallen on hard times, and it was in danger of being torn down. But then in 2006, new owners came to the rescue. They reopened the Culver Hotel. It was 2 sisters and their mother. And when I found this out, I wanted to support the place. Now, today, it's a beautiful, high-end, expensive boutique hotel again. So I said to Chuck in 2006, we should have lunch there on days when we weren't at the Playboy Mansion. And why? Of course, we all know the answer, because of all the Hal Roach comedies that were made right there, surrounding the place, and because for true believers like we are, Patrick, history speaks to us there.
Yeah.
So we told friends, and I think you recognize a lot of the names who've joined us every Tuesday or Wednesday for the last 18 years. I think it was 18 years now, including some of your own countrymen like Russell and Kevin Brownlow. Who else? Your countrymen. The daughter of one of your countrymen, Lois Laurel.
Yeah.
The whole area there has made a comeback because of all the tech giants that have moved in, Amazon, Netflix, erecting giant new studios to produce programming content for the cable networks and the streaming services. Now, one day, we were dining at the next table in the Culver Hotel. I turned and I looked and I saw the richest man in the world. Now, you know who that would be?
I can hazard a guess, but do tell me.
Okay. No one else recognized him. He was Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon.
Oh, okay. Fine.
Now, he just signed a long-term lease on the old Inn slot, the third of the Studios, Culver City's original 3 studios on Washington Boulevard from more than a century ago. Hal Roach Studios, then Thomas Ince, then Triangle, which quickly became Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Now, when Ince died so young, I think in 1924, when the Culver Hotel was first erected, that lot, which was right next to the Culver Hotel, became Cecil B. DeMille's, then Pathé, then RKO Pathé, then David Selznick, then Desi Lou, then MTM for Mary Tyler Moore, then 2 or 3 other places that I can't remember, and then Sony, and now Jeff Bezos, Amazon, has redone everything on that lot except for the Colonial Administration Building, which looks just like Hal Roach Studios did.
Oh, wow.
And they can't tamper with it. And you see this Colonial Administration Building at the start of Gone with the Wind and every Selznick picture. And it's right outside the Culver Hotel, right there. King Kong was made on the Ince lot. And it's just an 8-iron shot away from the site of Hal Roach Studios also. Now, the point of all this is how I get there for lunch every week. I can take 2 routes. One is identical to the way Hal Roach drove to his studio every day because I asked him about it once. I wanted to know how he drove to the studio. So on that route from his home, 610 Beverly Drive, Hal would go south on Robertson Boulevard, which takes you right by what once was the access road to the Arnez Ranch.
Oh, yeah.
AKA the Roach Ranchero, where so many comedy classics like The Hooskow, Teacher's Pet, Toad in the Hole were shot, scenes from way out west. But usually I take a different route. Now, the Big Business House was built in the year of our Lord, 1925, and owned by William H. Terhune, longtime studio employee, primarily as a film editor. But he directed a few shorts. He served as the unit manager for Way Out West. He did a lot of things there. He was there a long time. But in 1929, Terhune was renting out that property. His actual residence was elsewhere. I can't remember where, but I do know that in 1930 or 31, while still owning the Big Business House, he moved and was actually living on Doheny Drive in Beverly Hills. Now, not far north of there, I also live on Doheny Drive, and further north up the hill toward Sunset Boulevard was where Marilyn Monroe lived on Doheny. In fact, twice during her life, she lived there.
Right.
So to get to Culver City, the other route I can drive from Beverly Hills, I take Doheny, past Edgar Kennedy's residence, past Virginia Ruth Laurel's apartment house, which has been torn down, but where it was, and where she had Joe Rock as a tenant in that apartment house.
Wow.
But to Pico, I turn right on to Pico until I'm at the 20th Century Fox lot, where I turn left onto Motor Avenue. Now, have you ever heard of Motor Avenue?
I've heard of it, yeah.
Okay, Motor Avenue is a very important part of Laurel and Hardy history and Hal Roach Studios history. It's where Bob McGowan shot so many Our Gang comedies on location. Now, Motor runs only a few miles to connect Fox to MGM, which Fox bought briefly in 1929. Fox bought MGM, which news story I cover in the forthcoming Men of War monograph. A Motor goes through Cheviot Hills, then through Palms, past the Should Married Men Go Home house, to Culver City and MGM. And Patrick, are you a Three Stooges fan by chance?
I can't say that I am.
Okay. So for those out there who are, one of their best films, as Leonard Maltin, who is a big Three Stooges fan, as Leonard Maltin will confirm, was The Three Little Beers, 1935. And in that film, they drive a truck with a mountain of beer kegs, beer barrels, and they're right on Motor Avenue toward the then brand new 20th Century Fox lot. And on the left is the Rancho Park golf course, where they stage the golf scenes, where they tear up the golf course. So anyway, so that's Motor Avenue. Then you get to Cheviot Hills, which is a beautiful upscale West Side neighborhood community. Now, many of the higher paid Hal Roach Studios staff members built homes there because the area was brand new and so close to the studio. And also because of that proximity, many films were shot in that area. So as I drive the length of Motor Avenue twice a week, I always acknowledge the lots, the homes. Where Stan Laurel lived, I go right by his house. And where the finishing touch and Bacon Grabbers, which was the home of Elmer Regis, as you know, I'm sure, were filmed. I can see them as I drive. Always makes me smile as I pass each one. And I figuratively genuflect in my car. So they were all, these homes and these lots were all really close together. It's all built up now, but as you watch the films that were shot there, you see nothing but wide open spaces.
Yeah.
So halfway through Motor, after I pass the places I just mentioned, I come to the street called Dunleer. Now, if I turn right and go west, 1 block down, I can visit the home of Matt O'Brien at 10380 Dunleer. But who is Matt O'Brien, you ask? You ask that, don't you, Patrick? I
do ask that. I was just about to say, who is Matt O'Brien, Richard?
Very good. So, glad you're playing along here. So Matt O'Brien, he kept a low profile at Hal Roach Studios. He was a boyhood friend of Hal Roach back in Elmira.
All right.
In the 1930s, though, he was a studio vice president. He was the general manager and secretary treasurer of the company.
Oh.
And right near Matt O'Brien's house at 10348 Dunleer was the big, beautiful home of H.M. Walker.
Right.
Then if you come back to Motor and you cross it, the homes on the other side of Dunleer, driving east, are much less palatial, more like bungalows. Now, 3 doors down is 10281 Dunleer, though it's only number 281 in the film, and it was owned by, as we said, William Terhune, but rented out to someone named Taylor in 1929. And I have some of the big business casting call sheets, and a Peggy Taylor is listed on one of them. I've never tried to investigate who she was, but she must have been, she could have been the owner or the wife of the owner or the daughter, I don't know, but she appears in the film. So then if you continued along Dunleer heading east, you get just 1 block, you'd get to a street parallel to Motor called Queensbury. By the middle 1930s, only a block away and 1 down from the big business house was 3151 Queensbury at a street called Bannockburn, the street where Elmer Regis lived. But 3151 Queensbury, if you follow this, and you probably can't, but nevertheless, here's the big payoff. 3151 Queensbury was the residence of Buster Keaton after he was forced out of MGM. And I think he was there for a decade during the 1930s. He wasn't there in 1929, but shortly thereafter, when he was expelled by Louis B. Mayer from Metro, that's where he bought his house. And in one of the long shots, you might even be able to see this house in the film if you know what you're looking for.
Right.
Now, in more recent times, only a little northeast and just behind the big business house was the home until recently of the late Ray Bradbury, the celebrated screenwriter and novelist of things like Fahrenheit 451, it was first serialized before the landmark novel was published, and then in 1966, Francois Truffaut adapted the book as his famous film, Fahrenheit 451. But now this is hard to believe, especially in LA, but Bradbury never learned to drive a car. I don't know how you can live here and not drive a car, but he did. And as a kid, he roller skated all over Hollywood getting autographs from movie stars, and his favorites, number 1 favorites, were Laurel and Hardy, about whom he wrote poems and short stories, even late in his long life, and one of them was about the Music Box Steps. And the Way Out West tent gave him their Lifetime Achievement Award at one of their banquets here, and Bob Satterfield knew Ray Bradbury, and says he was well aware of where his beautiful home was situated with respect to Laurel and Hardy history, and that he loved it, being so close to the magic associated with the big business house. So I just think that's a neat thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, the lady who owns the big business house today, she knows that her house is still, even now, resting from the attack, that orgy of recriminations almost a century ago. And she sees people who drive by or stand and stare at home, and she knows what they're there for.
Yeah.
If you go there in person, and I think Russell has been there, and I'm sure you look forward to the day when you
yes.
visit this location.
Yeah.
You get a sense of the place you don't realize watching the film. The street slopes down as you pass the house, and the same behind it. And there's a standalone garage back there, equivalent to where the basement would be. But of course, bungalows like this one, we don't have basements in Southern California. And any scene you are watching, you can tell what time of day that George Stevens and Jack Roach were shooting it based on where the shadows are. If they slant to the right, filming was taking place in the afternoon. To the left means morning scenes. Now, Bob Satterfield, I always say this, he's the guy who's done more for Hal Roach Studios alumni on both sides of the camera, and both before and after they died than anyone. Wow. He's the one who discovered the big business house, and he did it the hard way, long time ago. George Stevens was the one who gave Bob the tip he needed on where to find this house, saying that it was somewhere just off Motor, and that Stevens would pause and think fondly about making big business every time he drove by. And of course, a big director like Stevens would be going back and forth between places like 20th Century Fox and MGM.
Yeah.
So this was more than 50 years ago that Bob got that tip from Stevens. And with only that clue, this is the way Bob did this. He just drove around and around and around, looking at random houses with frame grabs from the film that he may have gotten off the TV screen, until he found it. So 10281, though the film is mentioned, the house number that they pry off is the shortened 281. But can you imagine how he felt on that day? All of a sudden, he's standing there and he says, there it is.
There it is.
Now, Bill Terhune left Roach for MGM down the street in 1939. And at Metro, he was the editor on At the Circus for the Marx Brothers. But then he suffered a heart attack in 1940, and he died in the big business home. Oh, and I saw Hal Roach's draft of the sympathy letter that he sent to Terhune's widow, Patricia Terhune, and her husband was only 41 years of age.
Oh, good grief.
So finally, a controversy concerning the great story Hal Roach would tell about big business. Now, there's your truth, my truth, and the objective truth. All I can do is explain what I know. Yeah. If I prosecute the case that 2 + 4 = 6, and you say, no, it's 9, there's nothing more I can say.
It's not my job to argue or to. I'm just interested. Do
okay.
Tell. I love it. I just love this. The story is a brilliant story.
You see,
but I promise you, we're not going to fall out this time.
No. No. You see the same set of facts, or you may see the same. Well, we often, all of us, we may see the same set of facts through a different prism. Yeah. Although people have to understand all the facts clearly to begin with. So whatever the outcome in any kind of a controversy, people are going to believe what they want to believe. So again, I can only offer what I know. I've been explaining the big business story for years, thinking everyone must know the background information by now that's necessary to understand this. Understanding is the key word here, but they don't. And so as Wilfred Lucas laments in Pardon Us,
and still they come.
So here it goes again.
Tell me that again.
Certainly. So Hal Roach told this story all over, on film for Kevin Brownlow, on TV for Les Crane and other TV talk shows. At the Berlin Film Festival when he was 100, I was there, all over for years, for decades.
Well, just very quickly, they were selling Christmas trees in the summertime, and we needed a bungalow. And one of the boys working at the studio had a bungalow close to the studio. The location man went over and made a picture of the house and showed it to the director. He okayed the house. And we said we were going to wreck your house, but we'd put it back and pay you so much money. Well, what actually happened on the way to the house, the director who had the picture in his hand, he saw the house and he said, "Here it is, stop." So there were about 5 or 6 cars with trucks stopped and there in the house. And the assistant director says the key doesn't work. And the director said, "Never mind, we're going to break the door down anyway, break the door down." So they did. Well, they completely wrecked this house in 2 weeks. They broke every window, they cut down every tree, they cut down every bush. They wrecked everything there was about the house. And the last day, a man and wife and 2 kids drove up in front of the house. The woman almost fainted, and we had the wrong house. The other house was a block away.
Then in a few letters, Stan Laurel responded to fans and said, "No, he's wrong. The story is not true."
That was a lot of baloney. What does he think, we were a bunch of nuts or something? Nothing to it. He wasn't even in town when we made that picture. The guy that the house belonged to worked at the studio. In fact, in the afternoon, we went in at coffee breaks with him and his wife. Ridiculous.
So I ask, why do fans who weren't there, and I wasn't there, who only know some of the facts, automatically believe Stan Laurel and not Hal Roach? Then they praise Stan Laurel and they castigate Hal Roach. Why is that? And why is Stan Laurel's memory presumed to be better than Hal Roach's? Always puzzled me, and I get so frustrated over this, and I touch on it for the Men of War monograph insofar as how most people, this may be the answer, most people dislike their own boss. Mm-hmm. And they project, they transfer this animosity onto all bosses, including, by definition, Hal Roach, because he owned the studio. It's the lovable, underpaid, except he never was underpaid. But let's suppose he is underpaid underdog actor against the big, powerful producer, the boss, Scrooge, who must be wrong. It's the meek versus the strong, supposedly. But let's this may help, or may just make people mad. I don't know. But consider this. Consider this political analogy. It's like the poor, downtrodden street urchins, Palestinians versus the powerful Israelis with better weapons and more money. But you have no moral equivalence there. Your moral compass is broken if you side with the less powerful Palestinians in that conflict, just because they are the underdog. On the basis of morality alone, who is right and who is wrong? That's the relevant question. Now, if Israel renounced all of its military weapons, what would happen? The Palestinians, through Hamas, would destroy the state of Israel. But if the Palestinians renounced all their weapons and ceased launching terrorist attacks on Israel, there would be peace. In other words, the less powerful one cannot automatically claim the moral high ground, and the more powerful one is not necessarily always the villain. But I suppose it's just human nature to think so. Okay, so everyone at the studio loved Hal Roach. That's a given. That's a fact. If you knew these people, and I knew more than 100 of them, Hal Roach Studios alumni, everyone expressed loyalty to Hal Roach, everyone except in time for one person, and it was Stan Laurel, beginning from the time Laurel caused so much trouble trying to make Babes in Toyland. Thereafter, their friendship was strained, never the same, until Roach finally had to fire Laurel. The nominal reason given was for violating the morals clause in his contract, but it was much more than that. And you have to read the Men of War essay for those details. But fans today who were never there, and again, I wasn't there, who did not work at Hal Roach Studios, they just assume that the boss there, like all bosses, must have been a villain. And therefore, in any controversy, these fans will naturally take the side of the actor whom they love, understandably love and identify with. Who doesn't love and identify with Stan Laurel? So again, I cover this in the forthcoming monograph for Men of War. Now, fans may be surprised at what they read, but what they read there are facts and the truth that they themselves can verify. And again, was Stan Laurel's memory any better than Hal Roach's? There is ample evidence to show it was not, starting with correspondence. Yet all of that is beside the point I want to make now. Okay, so a studio is making a film. A location manager finds a shootable shooting space. He gets an approval from the producer, and he closes a deal with the owner of that property, wherever it is, whatever it is. In our case, one of the editors to be assigned to big business was, as we've covered, Bill Terhune. He owned a rental property which may have been vacant at the time. We think it was. So therefore, it's available. In any case, the studio settles on that house. Then a crew goes out to inspect and to prep the location for shooting. Just the crew, not the actors. Not the actors. That's why Laurel was not present when the damage happened. Why the crew stopped at the wrong look-alike house is unknown and will never be known, but they do stop at the wrong house. Now, no one is home. No one is supposed to be home because they've been told that. Now, what Hal told me was that the crew members necessarily, they had to prep the house when they went there, and it was just the crew with the director. Now Hal said they had a photo of the bungalow in question, and many in that neighborhood look alike. These bungalows look alike, especially on that side of Motor, on Dunleer. Now, why they didn't also have a house number, that baffles me. All I know is what Hal knew, and all he knew is that they were guided by a photograph. That's what he was told. So none of the activity so far is going to be reflected on casting call sheets. So what they reflect is irrelevant. Also, to this point, as mentioned, none of the actors are required to visit the location at the outset. They are not present when the crew first goes there. The crew gets there. The key to the house doesn't work, however. Now, these geniuses in the crew, they reason that it hardly matters because they have to break the door down anyway. Then they proceed to prep the house. They change things. They set things up for action. I don't know what all they do. But somehow the house sustains other probably minor damage before it is ready for scenes to be shot in the coming days. They make alterations, which I guess constitutes some kind of damage. Now, at some point, probably within a day or two, it came to light that they damaged the wrong house, damage of some sort. To what point, I don't know. But Hal Roach, as the producer, has to pay for the damage. He has to pay for two houses. Now, when you have to write a second check for something like that, that's a mistake you don't forget. So the damage was probably slight. Otherwise, it would have been a larger story around the lot, and everyone, including Stan Laurel, would have known about it. Yeah. So maybe Laurel did know at the time and forgot it later because it wasn't important to him. We can't say it at this late date. So those are the facts as best I understand what actually happened. Now, fast forward to the late 1970s. I was living in New York, but when I would visit LA, as I often did, I stayed at Hal Roach's house. Now, one night there was a dinner party. I have the details and notes somewhere, but from memory alone, I can't recall who was there or what this one particular story was that Hal told, but it didn't matter. The point is that it did not comport with the facts as I knew them as a know-it-all film historian that I was at the time, know-it-all. So I knew what he was saying was not correct. So when everyone went home as diplomatically as possible, I covered this with Hal. I was a little stunned by his response, and the dim bulb in my brain suddenly got really bright. Oh, a light was turned on above my head. He said, in a straightforward, matter-of-fact way, he wasn't correcting me, he wasn't scolding me, but this is what he said. But Dick, my version makes a better story. Suddenly, it was all clear to me. The light went on above my head. Hal Roach, like the other producers, directors, and writers in Hollywood who created entertainment for us, was not a reporter, not an author recording important events, not a film historian. He wasn't filing a story for the 10 o'clock news. He wasn't writing an article for the newspaper that an editor had to vet. He wasn't a serious film history professor writing a book or lecturing on structuralism or semiology for some graduate film history course. And he wasn't providing testimony under oath in a criminal or a civil trial. No, he was a producer. What does a producer do? He creates entertainment. How does he do it? He takes actual incidents, maybe from the news, maybe from something he reads or sees, and he adapts it. He embellishes it for entertainment purposes in the medium where he is working, the movies. He adapts it. It's the hand swiveling gesture from Wrong Again, the origin for which I explain in the little Men of War book we're doing. So Hal Roach was doing this his entire life, and he explained for me how he learned this lesson from his blind grandfather on his mother's side. His blind grandfather used to keep all the neighborhood kids back in Elmira spellbound with the stories he told the pre-adolescent Hal and his little friends. Now, how did he do it? The grandfather would take well-known events, classic literature stories, and he adapted them. He distilled them, he reworked them, so that little kids could understand and be entertained and learn from them. Now, Hal didn't realize this until he was grown, older, and encountered and recognized what the sources for all those tales had been that his grandfather told. And again, it's all spelled out in the Men of War piece, how Hal would conceive an idea for a short based on something that had actually happened in real life or something he saw in a dramatic film. Then he'd tell the writers, now, if we twisted this for comedy purposes, and he performed that Wrong Again hand gesture, if we twisted this for comedy purposes, here is how that would be funny. Now, he was trying to entertain movie audiences with his next film, just as he was trying to entertain the little gathering of friends at his home that evening when he told his story.
Yeah.
Just as he was trying to entertain any audience that he had when people would ask him about films, and in this case, big business. Quote, my version makes a better story. That's what interested him. The story about the incident is what interested him, not the literal, factual, actual incident. But he didn't make it up. It was based on something that actually happened. And again, he's a producer. He deals in stories. He's entertaining you. He's not testifying under oath in a murder trial. These films may be life and death to some of us, and they're life and death to you and me. But he made them as disposable entertainment. That's how the entire industry thought back then. He took facts as I've outlined them here and adapted them for entertainment by embellishing what had actually happened. That's what he was doing. So it's unfair to jump on Hal Roach thinking, oh, he's lying or he's making up nonsense. That's what he did his entire career, after all. And after all, that's why we have these great movies to enjoy today. They all started from ideas that he would share with writers, and then they take it from there. So if he started telling that story to friends in 1929, where he was having fun at his own expense, because he had to pay twice for 2 houses, as with any story or anecdote, when you repeat it, and this man repeated it and polished it and refined it as a function of the reaction he got for more than 60 years, for Christ's sake. You see what people like and laugh at, so that's what you go with as you polish the story through the years. Don't we all do that with any favorite story we have? Look at the stories that Leo McCarey would tell, both to Peter Bogdanovich and on This Is Your Life, Laurel and Hardy. We can see, okay, here's the germ of truth in what he's saying,
Yeah.
But he, like Hal Roach, was entertaining an audience. These were creative people, producers, directors, writers. Entertaining audience is what they did. Now, knowing we were going to talk about this, I pulled out an old VHS recording where Hal told the story on TV. And I found it interesting that he never once, at least on this occasion, he never once mentioned the names of Laurel and Hardy. The interviewer mentioned Laurel and Hardy and asked about this because he knew what the story was. He mentioned Laurel and Hardy. Hal Roach didn't mention Laurel and Hardy because they weren't there when this happened.
Yeah.
But people naturally assume, as I would too, as everyone would naturally, that Hal was talking about Laurel and Hardy themselves causing this damage. Again, Hal wasn't a reporter. He wasn't a know-it-all film historian. He was a producer. A producer has to be creative in telling stories. He develops as entertainment on film. That was his job. Find stories, create entertainment, create movies. Big business was one, and so is the big business story, entertainment. Or as Hal would say whenever he slow down to explain something for me, he'd say, "Is that clear? Is that clear?" It was more a command than a question, but
yes, that's enough for that now.
but anyway, that's my story, and I'm stuck in it, as Stan Laurel once said.
So just to be clear, then, so what we're saying, the facts are as far as Hal is concerned. So the studio guys went down to prep the house with a photograph of William Terhune's house, and they picked another house that looked similar.
Yes.
Broke the door down, and essentially that was the repair that he had to pay for. Is that sort of whatever damage they did getting into the house?
Well, whatever else they did to prep the house, and I don't know what that entailed. It probably
maybe pulling off the numbers and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
I really don't know what they would have done, but there probably were other things that they did.
Well, probably like pulling out the door, because obviously when they pull out the doorbell and all that kind of stuff, I was thinking that came off very easily, and the lantern comes off very easily. So obviously that's all got to be prepped and set up. So there's probably quite a bit of stuff that's been ripped off.
Here's another thing: if you've got cameras, I think that Stevens and Roach set up their cameras probably on the sidewalk. So if you've got trees in the way, you're going to have to tear those trees out of there. I mean, something like that. It just that's a wild guess. That's an example. They had to do something to prep that house, and whatever they did enough to constitute damage that they had to pay somebody for two houses. So, as I've tried to explain for decades, but believing now that the entire world must know the backstory, but they don't. And sometimes there was one exchange on Facebook that went on and on and on with people interposing ridiculous questions and objections to the point where I felt like I was addressing the prison class in Pardon Us.
Good morning to you. Good morning to you. Good morning, dear teacher. Good morning to you.
Really. So, and another thing, long ago when I first learned that there was this little controversy, I asked Hal about it, and he told me the backstory, but he was bad with names, always bad with names. He was friends with so many people. He couldn't remember who owned the house, but he told me it was somebody who worked at the studio. So I went and got a roster of employees, and I read them off one by one until we got to William Terhune. So, I mean, I knew the owner's name before anyone, but if you knew this man, maybe you can tell seeing him in interviews. I couldn't grill this man. I wouldn't dare have tried to, like you see hostile reporters doing at a White House press briefing with the president, any president. I couldn't ask him like he was on the witness stand. Well, where exactly was this house anyway? And who owned it? When was it built? How many bedrooms? How much did you have to pay for the damage on it? Where's the canceled check? Because Hal Roach was somebody who did not suffer fools kindly. Yeah. I spent 2 afternoons with Billy Wilder, and I thought the same thing with him. If you couldn't follow whatever his fast mind was racing through, he was not going to stop and cater to you because you couldn't keep up. Neither man would stop to hand feed you answers to questions. If Hal Roach thought you were grilling him like that, you'd get blown right out of the room faster than Laurel and Hardy leave town and way out west. I always had to be careful because he was capable of.
That's really it. So if you have a film that you want to ask him about, how would you have to sort of approach that quite cleverly and get him talking about it in a roundabout kind of way, or did you?
Absolutely. He would oblige. A lot of people would call him, want to talk to him, want to meet him. So he would oblige them, and he'd give them a certain amount of time. Like I know Randy always tells the story when he and Jordan Young first went to do their interview. They sat down with him, and he looked at them right in the eye, and I guess he said, "You have 45 minutes." So, he was in charge of everything all the time. So no, he did not live in the past. That's the really important thing to understand. Yeah. When he would tell these stories, he would tell them only to illustrate some point. I'd have to trick him into talking about the things that I wanted to deal with because he did not live in the past. And after, he would only oblige you so long, and here's what I would hear him say so many times: well, let's get back to the present. If you probably heard about the time I tricked him into stopping by the Big Business House. Did I tell you that story?
No, I don't think so.
Not the Big Business House, the Music Box Steps.
Okay, no, I don't think so.
He would call me and say, what are you doing this morning? What are you doing this afternoon? What are you doing for dinner tonight? How'd you like to go murder some birds? I want to give my dog Tripper a workout. So we drive to Chino and we'd rent game birds, chuckers, pheasants, and ducks. And I'd throw them to their doom into the air, and Hal would blow the hell out of them. If he missed, then I had my turn. And we'd bring these birds back to the house, and his housekeeper would cook them up for dinner. You'd have to be careful not to break a tooth chewing on the pellets. You'd have to spit out the pellets. But on the way back, Hal was very impatient, always impatient. And so we were in some traffic on the freeway, and he started barking out orders. Oh, let's get off the freeway. What do you say? So we did get off the freeway, and pretty soon we're on side streets, and I realized where we were. We were in the Silver Lake District. And I thought, oh my God, this is my opportunity to go the Music Box Steps with him. So we get real close to it, and I say to him, did you ever visit the Music Box Steps? No. Would you like to stop by and see what they look like today? Well, if it'll only take a minute or two. So he was going to tolerate that, and so we stopped by the steps, got out of the car, and I we talked about it for a while, and then I said, why do you say we jog up to the top? just making conversation, being funny. And he said, let's see you do it first. Now I realized, because I'm in really good shape for an old guy, and I thought, I can do this. And then I thought a second time about it, and I realized, if I run all the way up to the top of these stairs, that's going to take some time. He is capable of getting into that car and driving away. He really was. So, but again, so he didn't live in the past, and you really did, as you say, you really did have to be careful on how you broach these questions, because he was only going to oblige you so long.
Yeah, exactly.
But so he made these films, and as he was doing the work, these films were almost, as we said before, life and death to him, the way they are to us now. At the time, while he was working on them, but once they're in the can, out of the lot, on their way to movie theaters, he was on to the next one, and pretty much never gave the finished film any thought again after that. He didn't live in the past. I do. He did not. Now, there's one more thing, and then I'm through. One more thing. The last thing I promised. This is maybe just a curious coincidence. I have a 16 millimeter print of a 1921 Snub Pollard short called On Location. Charlie Chase directed it. Snub plays a gardener with OCD. No one is home at the house where Snub is working when along comes a film crew in need of just such a front yard to stage a scene. Turns out Snub gives permission, which it isn't his to give. Turns out that they're going to stage a battle scene, and of course they wreck the house. But as they talk him into giving this permission, they keep saying to him, but it's all for art's sake. And after the company wrecks the house, just as the owner returns, Snub pleads his case with the owner, who looks at his ruined front yard and his ruined house. But it was all for art's sake. And I couldn't help think of big business.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there you are.
That's brilliant.
All there is. There isn't any more.
Oh, I'm sure there is. I'm sure there is.
There's plenty more, but as I say, Randy will cover, or has covered,
yes,
we've already talked to him, all the important stuff. This is just trivia.
Brilliant. Richard, thank you so much for spending time with me again. I just sit here and listen as a fan, and it's lovely to be able to just listen to all this this magic that you impart, because it's so rare to find somebody with knowledge as in depth as yours. So thank you so much again for being with us.
Well, I pretty much wasted my life accumulating all this information.
It's not a waste. It is not a waste, not at all. No, there are so many of us, and you know I get comments quite regularly. Complimenting the podcast, but especially on the guests, and your name always crops up. People really appreciate the time that you spend with us, and as I say, all the information that you can pass on, because there are so few of us now, or few of you, I guess, that have those experiences and that information. So we just sort of sit here and soak it all.
Well, Randy is much better than I am at sharing it. I never amassed all this to share it or to publish it. I just wanted to know. I wanted a connection to these films. But Randy is the one who's really good. It's his mission in life, I think, to make converts, to share all this with people. He's the one who does a really good job at proselytizing for Laurel and Hardy, and you know, I mean, I'm trying to keep the films alive in my own way, but he's the one who's really, you know, sharing everything that he knows. He wants to share it with everybody.
Yeah, no, he's brilliant. He is a treasure. But no, I mean, you are both you're doing a fabulous job in just sort of securing and furthering Stan and Babe's legacy, and you know, and to be able to for me to be a part of that as well, and to try in my small way to keep it going, it's just it's a real honour. So thank you so much for supporting the podcast, Richard. And hopefully we'll be able to get you on a few more times.
Maybe so. I don't know I don't know how we're gonna for Men of War. I don't know how to do that, because I just want to say to people, just read this monogram.
That's right. That's right. Well, maybe we'll do an audio version. Maybe we'll record. You could read it out to us all, and we can have a nice bedtime story of Men of War.
Either that, or we'll put you to work, and you'll have to frame a bunch of questions, because I wouldn't know how to approach it. Because I would just say.
Well, this is it. You've bled it dry. Yes, I know what you're saying. You put everything into that, haven't you? Everything.
Yeah.
Well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
Yeah, there is a bridge in Hollenbeck Park, but
well, it was.
It was. Yeah, it's not there anymore. I don't know why they took it down either. I don't know why.
Progress. It's progress, Richard.
Progress, or maybe they're afraid of more people like Harold Lloyd did in Haunted Spooks trying to commit suicide, jumping into the water. But
yes, that's right.
As I point out in the Men of War essay, Charlie Chase filmed Dollar Dizzy there, and in that film, he stands in the middle of the lake, and you can see the water only comes up to his knees.
Yeah.
I mean, he wasn't going to drown in that water.
That's brilliant.
So anyway, that's all there is.
That's all there is. There isn't any more. It's brilliant. Thank you so much, Richard, and yeah, we'll speak to you soon.
Yes, sir.
So there you have it. That concludes episode 31, and with it, our deep dive into a highlight of the boys' film career, Big Business. I hope you enjoyed both episodes and now are a little clearer about what really happened during Christmas week 1928. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please do get in touch on the Blogheads Facebook page, or you can email me at theboys@laurelandhardyfilms.com. So, as usual, thank you to my fantastic guests over the past 2 shows, Randy Skretvedt and today's guest, Richard W. Bann. Thank you to the Bohunks Orchestra and Basta Music for the wonderful music. And a special thank you to you for listening and for your support. And until next time, it's goodbye from him.
Goodbye.
Goodbye from him.
Goodbye.
And it's a very goodbye from me. Goodbye.